long before the Red Sea split, before a staff struck water and turned it into a wall, before the name of Moses thundered through history as lawgiver, prophet, and deliverer. There was a girl watching from a distance. Her name was Miriam. Scripture mentions her quietly at first, almost casually. No trumpet announcement, no grand introduction. Just a young girl standing among reeds along the Nile River, eyes fixed on a basket floating between life and death. That moment alone tells us something Scripture never spells out directly. Miriam was brave before she was famous, watchful before she was celebrated, and involved in God's plan long before anyone called her a prophet. While Pharaoh was killing Hebrew sons, while mothers wept in secret, while fear ruled Egypt like a second king, Miriam stood her ground. She did not fight with weapons. She did not shout slogans. She did not march in protest. She watched. She waited. And when the moment came, she spoke. That quiet courage saved a deliverer, because when Pharaoh's daughter discovered the crying child, it was Miriam who stepped forward. Not Moses, not Aaron, Miriam. A young Hebrew girl confronting royal power with wisdom sharper than any sword. "Shall I go and call a nurse for you? From the Hebrew women?" With one sentence, Miriam outwitted empire. She reunited mother and child. She ensured Moses would be raised knowing his people, his pain, and his God. History remembers Moses' leadership. It remembers Aaron's priesthood. But Miriam, she fades into the margins until much later. And that silence is not accidental. Because Miriam's story is not about obscurity. It is about how power reacts when women refuse to remain invisible. Years pass. Moses grows. Egypt falls behind him like a discarded skin. The wilderness becomes Israel's classroom. And suddenly, Miriam returns to the narrative, not as a girl, but as a prophet. Scripture calls her that plainly, not helper, not assistant, not supporting character. Prophet, the same title given to Moses. After the Red Sea swallows Pharaoh's army, it is Miriam who leads Israel's first recorded worship celebration. Not Moses, not Aaron. Miriam. She takes a tambourine in her hand. Women follow her, music rises, and prophecy moves through rhythm and song. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. This is not decoration, this is leadership. Miriam did not echo Moses' words, she proclaimed God's victory herself. Yet even then, the narrative does something subtle. It records her song, but not her sermon. It names her leadership, but not its full reach. Why? Because Scripture often compresses the influence of women into moments while allowing men entire chapters. But influence does not depend on word count. Miriam stood beside Moses and Aaron as one of 3 leaders God used to bring Israel out of Egypt. The prophet Micah confirms it centuries later. "I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam." 3 names. One mission, shared authority, and yet power always shifts dynamics. As Israel settles into routine, as Moses' authority becomes centralized, as leadership hardens into hierarchy, Miriam speaks again. This time, not in celebration, but in confrontation. She challenges Moses, not his calling, not his miracles, but the assumption that God speaks only through him. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? That question is dangerous, not because it's false, but because power hates shared platforms. Scripture tells us God heard it, and suddenly, divine attention interrupts human tension. God does not deny Miriam's prophetic role, but he does correct her posture. Miriam is struck with leprosy, white as snow, and here the story turns uncomfortable, because the same Bible that called her a prophet now isolates her outside the camp, not permanently, but visibly, publicly, painfully. Moses intercedes. God heals her, but the camp must wait 7 days before moving forward. 7 days. Israel could not advance without Miriam restored. Let that sink in. Even disciplined, even corrected, even humbled, Miriam still mattered enough that the entire nation paused until she returned. God did not erase her. He refined her. And when she re-enters the camp, Scripture moves on. No reinstatement speech, no redemption arc, just silence. Miriam dies later in the wilderness, and her death is recorded in a single verse. No eulogy, no reflection, no national mourning described. Yet Jewish tradition tells us something Scripture hints at, but does not explain outright. There was a well, a miraculous source of water that followed Israel through the wilderness. And when Miriam died, the water stopped. Her death is followed immediately by a crisis of thirst. Coincidence or quiet confirmation? Many scholars believe Miriam's faith sustained Israel in unseen ways, ways Scripture did not fully document, but Israel felt deeply when she was gone. Moses struck the rock later in frustration, but Miriam had drawn water through faith. And suddenly, without her, the desert felt harsher. This is the pattern of Miriam's life. Essential, present, powerful, yet rarely celebrated. She challenged Pharaoh as a child. She led worship as a prophet. She challenged leadership structures as an adult. She suffered discipline. She was restored. She sustained a nation, and she died quietly. Why does Scripture tell her story this way? Because Miriam represents a truth we are often uncomfortable facing. God uses voices that institutions later try to silence. God empowers people systems later marginalize. God calls leaders whose influence is felt more than recorded. Miriam's story is not forgotten by accident. It is forgotten because it challenges assumptions about gender, authority, voice, and who gets to speak for God. She reminds us that questioning power is not rebellion when done from faith, that leadership does not always wear titles, that correction does not equal rejection, and that legacy is not measured by how loudly history remembers you. Moses delivered laws, Aaron served at altars, but Miriam shaped a people's spirit. She taught them to sing after trauma, to dance after oppression, to hope when survival felt impossible. And when she spoke up, God listened, even when He corrected her, even when He paused a nation because of her absence. So if you've ever felt overlooked, if your contribution feels minimized, if your voice was welcomed until it challenged comfort, Miriam sees you. And more importantly, God does. Because the same God who called her prophet, who waited for her restoration, who allowed the wilderness to feel empty without her, is still at work today. History may forget names, institutions may compress stories, power may resist shared authority, but God never forgets the ones who stood watch, who spoke truth, who challenged systems, and who sang freedom into the silence. Miriam's story is not small. It was made quiet, and sometimes the quietest stories carry the loudest truths.